And we've started recording these sessions mostly because it's we have seen that with the recording, on the one hand, the quality of our meeting minutes increases definitely, and also to have people who don't get a chance to connect to review what was said during the meeting. So, are you okay with that? Good.
Sure.
And we'll give a couple more minutes to for others to connect. And I apologize for the background noise. I was just telling Kenisha that my neighbor decided to cut a tree, so it's so it's quite loud back here. So if you see me going in and out of mute, that's why. Hello, Ketra, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Sorry, am I pronouncing your name well, Ketra?
Yes, it's Keitra.
Ketra. Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. In the interest of time, and to respect the time of all colleagues who connected at right on time. We can wait for Alicia to come back. So, because I see that she's not in her seat. Okay, I would say in the interest of time, let's start, and then we can catch up with other colleagues as they join. So welcome to our community of practice session. Most of you know me. My name is Maria Ortiz. I work in the Office of the Executive Secretary at ECLAC, and I am the coordinator for 2030 Agenda activities here at ECLAC. And I am joined today by my colleagues Lidia Rosa Jenny from the Office of the Secretary of the Commission and Mareke Eberts, who works with me in the Office of the Executive Secretary. So welcome to all of you. The topic that we chose today was stakeholder engagement. It's definitely a topic that is very relevant during the preparations of the VNR, during the presentation of the VNR, and also after the VNR. So, and for SDG, for 2030 Agenda implementation in general. So definitely a topic that is very relevant. One of the things that we wanted to share with you in terms of reflections was that I mean, the 2030 agenda itself at its inception was the most participatory, like the generation of this agenda was the most participatory process in the UN history. It was really a process that brought together thousands, literally, of people to envision. It used to be called the future we want. And there were open working groups and all sorts of very open and participatory processes to generate the agenda, to discuss what the SDGs were going to be. So in it, like at its essence, the 2030 agenda is a very participatory agenda. And with that also came the expectation, because it was a new process. It was a historical milestone with regards to participation. So then the different stakeholders also started expecting and requesting this participation continuing in other aspects of the 2030 agenda. So we see this very participatory network in the high-level political forum, in the regional fora for sustainable development. So definitely you can see that there is this component of a multi-stakeholder component to the 2030 agenda. So something that I wanted to share with you. I'm going to make a small parenthesis to welcome Victor Alegría from Belize. Hola, Victor. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Oh, it's so nice seeing your faces, my lord. It's so nice, guys. I'm super excited seeing you. So thanks so much for the invitation.
We're excited to see you too,
Muchas
Victor.
gracias.
And I also say hello to my colleague Alejandro Bustamante, who just joined as well. So as I was saying, on the one hand, the 2030 agenda is very participatory. Also, it's very ambitious. So it calls for a whole of society. Like there is this a concept of the whole of society approach, which means that the government alone can not only implement the 2030 agenda, but it's really seeking a stakeholder participation and engagement and contribution to the implementation of the 2030 agenda. And in various fora that we've had with government representatives who are entrusted with the process of the VNRs, one of the questions that we share with you is that it's not only a matter of how we involve stakeholders, but why we involve them. We know that it is expected, it's part of the nature of the agenda, but what is the value added of each stakeholder that brings to the table in this voluntary national review process? It's not only let's have them in a meeting room and then say that the process was participatory, but really, what is the value added that the private sector representatives, civil society, trade unions, and academia, parliamentarians, local governments, what is the value added that all these stakeholders can bring to the VNR process? So it's just one thing that we put out there for reflection. Obviously, it doesn't have a straightforward answer. And also, discussing how can this contribution be reflected? Is it through data? Is it through showcasing specific specific good practices or projects? Is it by integrating them in the drafting of the VNR or sections of the VNR in the presentation? Really, like starting to think, so how do we reflect? Why do we engage them, and how do we reflect their contribution? And also one of the things that we were discussing with Anissa before the meeting started, how do you deal with competing agendas and different priorities? Because the VNR is a very visible process and the HLPF is a very visible event. So there's definitely competing priorities that are going to be there. So I leave that with regards to initial reflections. So you have them on the back of your mind for the discussion. And for this session, we have invited Trinidad and Tobago to share with us their experience on stakeholder engagement in the process for the drafting process for the VNR that they just presented in July this year. So to do the presentation, we will welcome Kenisha Douglas from the Ministry of Planning. Kenisha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maria, for inviting Trinidad and Tobago to present in this session for the Community of Practice. Colleagues, good morning. Nice to see your face. I would express the sentiments by Billy's that oftentimes you sit in Zoom meetings and everyone has their camera off, everybody's on mute, and it's a cold place to be sometimes, but I'm glad that we feel comfortable enough in these sessions, to put on our camera so that we can at least have some sort of interaction with each other. So I am going to share my screen now. Okay, Maria, everything looks okay?
Yes, we can see your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to present Trinidad and Tobago's experience with our stakeholder engagement during our VNR. Trinidad and Tobago successfully presented its voluntary national review on July the 15th at the 2020 HLPF. It was our first VNR, which unanticipatedly took place during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, which at the time exacerbated existing challenges that we were already facing and even some minor setbacks. However, Trinidad and Tobago has always been a resilient nation, and we completed our VNR project with much lessons learned that we have documented. The Technical Cooperation Unit within the Ministry of Planning and Development would have spearheaded our VNR project, which would have included the management of the day-to-day activities and the day-to-day operations for the entire VNR process. That would have included the presentation that we did at the HLPF, the preparation of the VNR report, and even the preparation of the statistical annex that complemented the VNR report. Our VNR report would have covered only 8 out of the 17 SDGs. So we would have looked at goals 3, 4, and 5, goals 8, goals 10, goals 13, 16, and 17. So what specifically was our stakeholder engagement experience? So our very first point of contact was the handbook. So Trinidad and Tobago's preparation for our voluntary national review report and management of the VNR project process would have included being guided by what was in the handbook for the preparation of the VNRs, the 2020 edition that was issued or prepared by UNDESA. So this document would have informed the entire VNR process, including our stakeholder engagement, and we would have taken the information from the handbook and tailor it to our local context, just to make sure that we covered the things that needed to be covered that weren't explicitly stated in the handbook specifically. So then, taking information from the handbook, we would have developed our project schedule. So understanding that what we were doing for the VNR, we treated it as it was a project. So we would have had the team that was working within the technical cooperation unit develop a project schedule which contained an entire section. We dedicated an entire section within our project schedule for stakeholder engagement. So activities that were surrounding our stakeholder engagement and what we needed to do was very detailed in the stakeholder plan, in the project schedule. Um, it was at times a very tedious and effort-driven process, and some of the activities included within the project schedule were preparing and disseminating correspondence to stakeholders, because when we had our sessions, we would have had to invite them to meetings, get them acquainted on what it is we were doing, getting executive approval, and at times even key stakeholders approvals. And when I say key stakeholders here, I'm talking about internal stakeholders. So the consultants that we worked with, even liaising with the UN, because we worked with them as well. Even building a stakeholder database, maintaining that database, updating that database. And then when we started interacting with stakeholders, making sure that we're following up with those participants and getting the information, the necessary information that we need from them. And then all the other tasks that were related to the engagement events that we were able to host prior to the COVID-19 lockdown. So coming out of the project schedule, we had developed a stakeholder engagement plan, and part of that stakeholder engagement plan would have included a communication strategy. So the resources that worked on the communication plan at different points throughout the VNR process, we hired 3 consultants. So we knew that stakeholder engagement had to cover both islands. That is stakeholder engagement in Trinidad and stakeholder engagement in Tobago. So fortunately for us, during the procurement process for hiring a consultant for preparing the VNR report, we received an application from someone who was actually based on the island of Tobago. So that proved to be very beneficial for us. So we were able, through the discussions with the UN who were doing the procurement for us, to hire that person to focus and be in charge of managing the stakeholder engagement in Tobago. So we had a dedicated consultant for Trinidad and one for Tobago to engage with the stakeholders. And then the third consultant that we had was managing the production of our data and liaising with the stakeholders that we would have identified just to get the necessary data from them. So on the administrative and management side, the core team in the technical cooperation unit that worked on the VNR would have consisted of 6 persons. And we also received the support from the other staff within the technical cooperation unit and even the wider ministry as well. So even though we had the core, the consultants working on the stakeholder engagement, they still needed administrative support, and that is where the VNR team provided that assistance. As part of the communication strategy that was part of the stakeholder engagement plan, we worked very closely with our corporate communications unit within the Ministry of Planning and Development, and they were able to create sort of a brand for us that we used throughout the VNR process, and every documentation and literature that we would have disseminated, and that is connecting the dots to the SDGs. Even the logo design that we used for our VNR throughout, which is the SDG colors in the dots in the map of Trinidad and Tobago, that was designed by our communications unit. And it was just so that we have a theme throughout the VNR process that could even extend beyond when the VNR was completed, so that it shows Trinidad and Tobago's commitment to the SDGs, and it gets that continue that awareness that we would have started during the VNR process. So we also made sure that our communications unit was part of our engagement process, just to make sure that we were able to capture those engagements and those events that we were able to have face-to-face. Our VNR stakeholders would have included the divisions within the Tobago House of Assembly and other non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations on the island of Tobago. And we tried as much as possible to mirror the stakeholder list in Trinidad and Tobago. So the organizations that we were communicating with in Trinidad were also the same organizations that we were communicating with in Tobago, just to make sure that when we pull the data together and we're able to provide, write the report, that there wasn't showing more dominance from one island to the other. So we try to balance that out as much as possible. So we would have engaged with the ministries, departments, and agencies at the central government level. And we only engaged with those ministries, TJ divisions, and departments that were custodians, so to speak, of the 8 SDGs that we would have reported on in our VNR. We would have also engaged with private sector entities, academia, non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations, and subject matter experts. And when we did our online survey, we would have reached the general public, well, at least those who at the time were ready to be able to be engaged online. So our planned stakeholder engagement were one-on-one interviews, focus group sessions, and public consultations, and then also having print and social media presence. We were able to complete the one-on-one interviews, the 4 focus group sessions, and I consider us very fortunate to be able to have done that, because that happened just before the first pandemic lockdown in the country. And we were able to continue our print and social media engagement. Unfortunately, we had to cancel our public consultations because that was going to be scheduled after our focus group sessions, and by that time we would have had the lockdown. So whatever planned engagement we had after that, even meeting with the trade unions, we had to cancel those for the VNR process. So at the time when we wrote our VNR report, we would have had a wealth of information that we would have gathered from the stakeholder engagement process, and that is well documented in our VNR report that is available. And it showcases the initiatives that the stakeholders are implementing toward achieving the 8 SDGs that we had selected to report on. So through print and social media posts that we did, we had well over 45,000 interactions on those platforms. We would have had 49 face-to-face one-on-one interviews with academia, ministries, departments, and agencies, subject matter experts, private sector, and civil society organizations. We would have conducted 4 focus group sessions under the People, Partnership, Prosperity, Peace and Partnerships pillars of the 2030 agenda. And we would have had those focus group sessions with ministries, departments, agencies, academia, and civil society organizations. To ensure that we did continue to engage with the public despite having the lockdown, we would have quickly transitioned to an online survey, and we would have emailed that survey out to specific organizations that we would have been collecting their contact information for. And we would have also published the link for the survey on social media platforms, the Ministry of Planning's website. And by closing date for the survey, we would have received 1,008 responses. When we did the online survey, there were a lot of interactions and questions about and discussions about what persons perceive as the government's implementation of the SDGs, and it wasn't as favorable. So it was something that we noted is an area that we need to do more work on in terms of awareness, public awareness on the SDGs, and not just on the SDGs, but what the government is doing to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. So what has been a good practice for us during the VNR project? So this is good practice at the project level. So I would look at our stakeholder engagement from the time we initiated the VNR project to the time we closed the VNR project. So the government of Trinidad and Tobago is extremely thankful and grateful that we had received the support of the United Nations country team for our VNR process. We had an initial meeting with the UNCT to discuss our intentions to conduct a VNR and present, and we would have held subsequent meetings with UNCT to discuss specifically how the UN is going to support us in that process, and get a sense from both parties what level of support we can receive based on our needs and expectations. So UN ECLAC would have procured our lead consultant and the Tobago consultant for the preparation of the VNR report. UNDP would have procured our statistical consultant, and we had someone dedicated to going out, getting the data, doing the collection, doing the analysis, doing the report write-up. And then the UN Resident Coordinator's Office gave us support when we hosted the focus group sessions, and when we had to get our graphic artists to do our report design, cover, and our layout. And then they also hosted us, because we did our VNR presentation at the HFPF at the UN House. We used their conference room and their multimedia facility, and that proved to be very excellent for us. So, you know, we had a very close and strong working relationship with the UN throughout our VNR process, and especially when we had to engage with stakeholders. They were very much a part of that process. Also, with respect to the project, the VNR project, we had internal stakeholders, and that would have included our communications unit and the role that they played in helping us disseminate the information to stakeholders, engaging with the public, keeping the VNR presence going, working with our IT department and the support that they gave us on the day of leading up to our presentation, and doing our testing and making sure that we were able to use the platform that was dedicated for the VNR presentations. And then the staff, the wider staff in the technical cooperation unit and the ministry that supported our process, and also making sure that the executive management was aware of how the progress was going, so that when it was time for approvals and getting sign off on different things, that they were also aware. So I know a lot of times we talk about the stakeholders as it relates to civil society organizations and private sector and so on. But I think during your VNR process, it's also important to understand that for the project that you're going to be doing, there are stakeholders that you have to engage with as well. And you also have to understand what are their needs and expectations and make sure that, you know, you are treating and addressing those as well. So as it comes to the product, good practice, and when I say product here, I'm talking about what was produced as a result of the VNR project exercise and the process that we went through. And that essentially is the VNR report / statistical annex, and then when we had the VNR presentation. So for Trinidad and Tobago, the actual stakeholder groups that we would have engaged with, whose work on the SDGs implementation is treated in the VNR report, would be on the government side, and this is just a snapshot of some of the stakeholders. So for the government side, we would have engaged with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, Labor, Office of the Prime Minister, the divisions within the Tobago Assembly, and then just a few listed here: private sector organizations, the Green Alternatives in Action, the Energy Chamber of Trinidad and Tobago, the Employers Consultative Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and the Trinidad and Tobago Medical Association. And other civil society organization, we would have met with the Boko Reef Trust, because we did report on SDG 30, so that's the environmental aspect, Autism Tobago, and then Canary, which is the focus on environment, Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute, and United Way. When we presented our VNR at the HLPF, we would have had representation from government, one representation from civil society. So we would have chosen Canary as the civil society representative to present as part of the delegation for Trinidad and Tobago, because they would have done a shadow report on SDG 13 and showed how Trinidad and Tobago and the other civil society organizations how they were progressing on SDG 13. And we thought that they were best suited to be part of the delegation in terms of their work and the coordination role that they played in the SDG Knowledge Platform for civil society organizations, to showcase how they are implementing the SDGs. And on the government side, we would have had the Ministry of Planning, which was spearheading the VNR process, and the Ministry of Foreign and Caribbean Affairs in the form of our ambassador, who actually did our VNR presentation. So top 3 challenges that we would have experienced, and I also took the liberty to show what were some of the solutions that a solution to address those challenges that we faced. So one of the things that we admittedly did not have was a dedicated VNR budget. And Maria, you would have mentioned, just in our chat before we actually, as we started, competing priorities during the VNR process. And that is one of the things that Trinidad and Tobago faced, and it became even more challenging with the onset of COVID. But because of competing challenges, it was a little difficult for us to get a dedicated budget for our VNR process. So how that was addressed was by us getting the support from the UN country team, especially for focus group sessions, getting the artists and getting the consultants that we needed for this process. And that proved to be very beneficial. And it really did help move the process along. And I think for everyone, the COVID-19 pandemic was a challenge for us. And as I mentioned before, fortunately for us, we would have completed our face-to-face focus group sessions before the onset of COVID-19. So then when it came to the public consultations, we had to quickly transition online and, continue the engagement there. And I think, I had a thought that if we had to do this probably a little later on when technology started to really become a little bit more mainstream, we probably would have gotten, much more responses. But because it was just at the beginning when it started, a lot of people weren't fully online as we are now. We only had 108 responses, but that was our solution to that challenge. And another challenge, and I know this is not during the VNR process, but it's post VNR. And I think this is something that I wanted to put here to flag so that persons, countries who are doing the VNR now can take it into consideration. What is going to be a post VNR activities? And this is an area for improvement for us to really sit down and think of, okay, how do we not lose the momentum? How do we continue the discussion? How do we continue the engagement even post the VNR and still engage with our stakeholders and not have them feel that only because we had the report to do, we call them together, we had this interaction, but to show our commitment to the SDG process and show our commitment to achieving the 2030 agenda and show our commitment to continue to work with them in the whole process of connecting the dots to the SDGs. How do we continue that conversation and continue that engagement? So that is an area of improvement for Trinidad and Tobago. So this is the end of my presentation, and I hope that what was shared can help a colleague with their preparations, and thank you.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive and super interesting presentation, Kenisha. I mean, a lot of food for thought coming out there. One thing that I thought was brilliant was that this distinction between external and internal stakeholders, because we as you generate the VNR, you really need to engage other parts of government and other people who are going to support you in making sure that the VNR process is a success. So after this presentation, I open now the floor for questions, comments, reflections. So the floor is open. Over to you. And I know that Belize and the Bahamas also have had this experience previously. So maybe you can also share from the post VNR activities to engage. Lydia, I see that your hand is raised.
Okay.
Well, just to start, but of course, if the countries, if the Bahamas and Belize want to speak first, go ahead. Perhaps Victor. I just wanted to also add my congratulations to Kenisha Douglas for her excellent presentation, and I have many questions. The first one is if you can give us more detailed information about how you managed to incorporate Tobago's participation, like their stakeholders. You explained a bit, but perhaps if you can give more information about how you manage it, because for other multi-islands states like the Bahamas, like it can be more challenging. I know that we had a conversation with St. Vincent and the Grenadines that this was really an issue to include the input from stakeholders from the different islands. And the other question is how you manage to conduct the selection process of stakeholders. Like, what was the criteria that you used in order to include or exclude some stakeholders and have this comprehensive representation among the different sectors. For instance, for the private sector, how you manage to select or exclude, and how was this process being done in order, to avoid any sensitive issue with certain actors. And then I have other questions, but I will ask them later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. What we can do is we can listen to Victor, and then we give the floor back to Kenisha. Over to you, Victor.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for the invitation again. And Felicia, definitely a nice presentation. I could relate back again. We did our first VNR 2017, so I can relate to a lot of what you're seeing in terms of challenges and all. But I think we're a little bit more advancing the VNR process more, and I'm glad to see that we're adapting, adjusting, modifying the processes, and I think it's very good. And so I had a couple. Well, one of the first questions, I guess, Lady had already asked for it in terms of what criteria do you use to select the stakeholders in the process of consultation, no? Because that is very important, considering that in the case of Belize, we were to have submitted a VNR last year and presented a VNR last year. Unfortunately and sadly, we weren't able to get that external support that we required. I think a couple of you guys are aware that up to the last minute they weren't able to really get the UN system on board in the case of Belize to provide us that support. And as a developing country, of course, finances is very important and very limited. And if we don't have that external support, both financial and technical, then it makes our reporting very difficult and challenging. And especially in light that the Sustainable Development Unit in Belize is only a two-person team. We don't have, for example, you mentioned in your presentation, I think you have a technology or technical support arm or department or ministry. We don't have something like that in Belize. So my question is, how do you select the criteria? What criteria do you use to selecting the stakeholders so that again you avoid or you don't have that preferential treatment perception out there? Two, the technological challenges, because two of the things that we faced in Belize just about the time when we were collecting the data was the full lockdown that we had in Belize, and so that was a challenge because I don't think we were prepared with the technological portion of it to be able to do a lot of like online surveys and questionnaires, and for my end personally, that's a limitation that I have. And two, data availability, because we're still in the process of trying to populate our national statistical system in Belize. And I was wondering, and my apologies, I haven't read the report, how much data, actual data, aggregated, disaggregated data was available during the consultation process and data collection process, no? At least those three things right off the bat, I'm saying. And just congratulate you in the last portion, post VNR, and I think that is one of the things that in Belize you were really with. I see my colleague Darlene is on board now and asked her to join us, and that is one of the things that Darlene and I were really trying to push for this VNR that we were trying to do for last year, the post VNR. How could we ensure that the VNR is not just a one-time report, but it's essentially a tool that you can use to continue momentum, that would then make significant changes and improvements post the VNR process, at least within the areas that we were reporting on last year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. And should we take because I'm looking at the time, why don't we listen to Anissa as well, Kenisha, and then I'll give you the floor to you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Anissa.
All right, thank you, Maria and Kenithia. Congratulations to Trinidad and Tobago. And I loved how you outlined the entire process. Two questions with respect to timeline. And, you know, there was something that Maria asked about why involve the stakeholders. And this goes to the post-VNR session. The post-VNR element of it. So for us, we're currently undertaking our stakeholder engagement work, and it's with a view to building relationships with new partners to carry on the agenda and to try to implement the agenda. I'm wondering if that was a consideration when you chose your stakeholders, and if after the VNR, and I know in post-COVID it's probably been, or during COVID it's been a challenge, very likely, but have you continue to build on those relationships? That's number one. The other thing is true with respect to the number of individuals that you used during this entire process from a technical standpoint. And I think that probably, I don't know if it shortened the timeline with having individuals focus on specific tasks, but I wondered how were you able to stick to the timeline? When were you guys drafting? I know that you had the inputs at a certain time. For us, we're aiming to have our first draft by the end of January to have out there for public circulation and comment. And I'm wondering if you could answer those two questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Anissa. Lydia, I see your hand is up. Do you have another question? Okay.
I have, so let's wait.
No worries, no worries. Okay, Kinesia, back to you.
Okay, thank you for your questions. I'm going to try as much as possible to answer them within the time. The first question from Lydia was, how do we manage the engagement and incorporated Tobago in the stakeholder engagement? When I mentioned in my presentation that we had 3 consultants, we had a dedicated consultant in Tobago. So that Tobago consultant worked with the lead consultant in Trinidad very closely so that the stakeholder engagement plan mirrored for Trinidad, mirrored Tobago's engagement plan, mirrored Trinidad's engagement plan. And the 2 consultants would have had a lot of discussions together in terms of who do we engage, what organizations are you engaging with, and the type of information that we want to get. So because Trinidad and Tobago only focused on 8 SDGs, the stakeholder groups that we looked at would have focused around those goals. So goals 3, 4, and 5, 8, 10, 13, 16, and 17. So we tried to get umbrella organizations because we knew within the time frame it would not have allowed us to meet with every single person. So as much as you can get umbrella organizations, because a lot of civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations would cluster and have themselves together in associations. So if you meet with a representative from the association, it would help you to touch as much persons as possible. We did allow the expertise of the consultants to kind of guide the selection process, in that they would have recommended, I think we should meet with this organization, I think we should meet with this private sector organization, if it is that we're looking at these specific goals, if it is that we're looking at these specific targets. People didn't only specific targets under those goals. So then looking at the type of information and the data that we wanted to collect, that would have channeled how we selected the stakeholder organizations to engage with. But understanding that we couldn't engage with everybody, but tried as much as possible to get coverage for the goals and the targets that we wanted to report on and get data for. So having a dedicated consultant on the island of Tobago really helped with collecting the information, doing the stakeholder engagement, and then feeding that information back to the lead consultant in Trinidad for incorporation into the entire VNR report. So I think I would have covered your 2 questions in one, Lydia. So Victor, you would have asked about the criteria for selecting stakeholders. I think my response to Lydia would have answered that. Yeah. And then you asked about data availability. So if you look at if you get a chance to look at our statistical annex, you would see that there's missing information. We weren't able to get any information for SDG 10 at all, so we know that that is definitely an area that we need to focus on and get kind of have a strategy for how we're going to collect the data that is needed to report on those targets. But data was a challenge. The statistical consultant would have accompanied the other consultants, well, the lead consultant, when we had the one-on-one sessions with the ministries, departments, agencies, and would have engaged them. So there were two parts: the general part, in terms of getting a sense from them, what were you doing? And then the statistical consultant would have focused specifically on the targets that we were reporting on, and then specifically what the metadata was, and getting that information. So it was twofold in that there was general information that was being collected, and then the statistical consultant being very focused on getting certain data related to the targets. We did not have data for every single thing. At times we had to use proxy data, and at times they were challenged even getting the data because we realized that organizations don't collect the information in the way that would allow for the analysis of the data as it relates to the specific target. So then that was a challenge: how the data is being collected, how the data is being stored, and whether or not you're able to now use the data that they're collecting to actually report on the specific targets. Anisha's question, I hope I answered your question, Victor. Anissa, your question was on timeline, and was there any consideration for building relationships? Now, one of the unique experiences we had is that we had stakeholder civil society organizations who were aware of Trinidad and Tobago's process in the VNR and actually reached out to us and said they want to be involved in the process. How can we help? What support do you need? And one of those organizations was Canary. They were always following up with us, where are you in the process? You said you were going to engage with us. Is that still happening? I mean, if anyone working in government, there is the bureaucratic challenge that you have to go through, because even though you want to engage, you at the technical level can't just engage. There needs to be executive approval. And going through that process at times slowed down how fast we would have liked to move, and when we would have liked to engage. So that was a challenge for us. But having civil society being very involved and wanting to participate and always following up with us, that really helped to keep the momentum going. So at least they didn't feel that, okay, we're not serious, we now haven't gotten back to them. But then just understanding that, the process in government is a different process to outside of, that environment. But, constantly communicating with them and, letting them know this is where we are and we're hoping to, get back to you at a certain point in time. Sticking to timelines was very challenging, very, very challenging. Just by the fact of, what I would have alluded to before, and that is getting your approvals and, it going through the chain of command, and then when it gets to where it needs to get the sign off, that information now trickling back to you, and, always having to follow up. But I think what allowed us to be able to still present on time and submit our report at, I would say, within a reasonable time, was having dedicated staff in the process. So we actually had a VNR team that consisted of 6 persons, and we were managing the project from day to day, day to day, day to day. things that we send up for approval, making sure that we following up on that. So even within the 6-member team, 2 of those team members were dedicated for stakeholder engagement. So they had responsibility for managing that section in the project plan. And then another section in the project plan person, and that is what we did. So there were different sections within the project plan, and we assigned each person to manage a section. So even though for certain activities we all were involved, but the overall responsibility for managing that section in the project plan was given to specific persons. So there were 2 persons who were assigned to stakeholder engagement, and that is doing the following up, doing the correspondence, doing the dissemination, and just making sure that we were always on top of the activities that needed to be done. And as the VNR team, we had weekly meetings. Monday, usually on a Monday morning, we have a meeting, get a sense of this is where we are, this is what still needs to be done, these are the things we need to follow up on. Okay, how can we move? This is stalling, how can we get it moved? And, working closely with the assistant director within the technical cooperation unit, who was that liaison between us and the executive, just to move things a little forward. So I think having a champion in the process that kind of acts between the technical level and the executive level to kind of bridge, someone that stands between to bridge those two things would really help. And it would, there were times when the timelines were off, but it didn't stop us from working. So yes, we missed the deadline. Yes, we were kind of off on certain and meeting certain times, but we still kept working. We still kept pushing because the ultimate goal was to make sure that we completed the report and submitted it and presented by a certain time. So we were working towards that end goal timeline, even though mini or sub timelines before the day we presented on the 15th were kind of running over at times. But having dedicated staff for certain aspects throughout the VNR process would really help, and also having a champion to help push things along when they get stalled and so on is going to greatly assist as well. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you very much, Kenisha, for everything that you have shared. I think that one of the great values of this discussion is really getting into the nitty-gritty of how you live the everyday management of this process. So these insights that you're giving us with regards to engaging different parts of stakeholders outside of the organization, inside of the organization, and really catering your stakeholder engagements to the SDGs that you wanted to go in depth in your report. That was really, really helpful. Are there any other comments or questions for our presenter? Lydia, please.
No, well, if we can use every second. I just wanted to know what now, because you raised something that it's the first time that we are really discussing the post-VNR presentation. How civil society organizations, for instance, Canary, because they created this SDG online platform, how are they, interacting with you? What are your plans or ideas in order to meet their demands? Because I imagine you created this momentum. They were even in the delegation. So how are you dealing with those demands from the stakeholders or ideas that you are having to meet their demands? Thank you.
Right. So, Lydia, that is one of our challenges, and that is something that we need to work on. So, when we did our VNR process, we did not have a dedicated institutional mechanism for SDG implementation, monitoring, and reporting. So, we put together a team that works on the VNR project, but post that, there needs to be something institutionalized in order to continue with the interaction with stakeholders, in order to make sure that, you know, we have a system in place that would allow for the continuing interaction and doing that follow-up. So in the absence of that, we were not able to meet with our stakeholders, VNR, and, you know, continue that interaction and continue working with them. I mean, they would have expressed that they are ready, they are willing, but I don't think that as government and as a ministry we are in a place yet to continue that collaboration at another level. And that is something that we're working on and is being discussed. And until, you know, at the technical level, we have been, we understand where it is that, you know, the executive wants to go with it. We know that they're there, and we do have the plans and the intention to do it, but we're working on setting up that foundation, because in the absence of that, then we're just interacting for interacting's sake, and it's not going to be meaningful or towards a particular result. So we're working on making sure that post the VNR, there is some mechanism through which that interaction can be done, so that when we do get to the point of doing another VNR process, it would be that we would have been continuing the work even post the first one.
Thank you, Kenisha, for that. I don't see any other little hands raised. Before we go, we wanted to just take 2 minutes of your time to share with you the platform that we have created for the community of practice. My colleague Marike has just put the link on the chat of these Teams meeting, and it's basically it's on ECLAC's page, and it allows you to see all the materials that have been generated through these meetings of the community of practice. So Marike, if you can share your screen and share with us a little bit about the content of this page. Over to you.
Great. Can everyone see my screen? Can you see it all right? Okay, great. So I'm just scrolling down. That's actually the link I just put into the team chat. So basically you can see all the different sessions of the community of practice, the ones in Spanish, and if you scroll all the way down, you find the community of practice for the Caribbean countries in English. So maybe I just pick one example. I just picked the one on stakeholder engagement, obviously reflecting the topic of today. So you can see that on this website, if you scroll down, you see like a general description of the community of practice. You will find the participants of countries that participated in each of the sessions. You also see the specific session goals and also the attachments. So just to give you an example, you will always find the meeting minutes of the meeting that we obviously also share with you via email, but I think it's great to have them in one spot. And also the presentation that was presented, which you can find here. In this case, in the case of this session, or maybe with future sessions as well, you sometimes even can find links. For instance, this session was also about sharing the results from the regional workshop that we held in February. So if you look at the link sections, you will go straight to that session as well, with all the information, the agenda. In this case as well, you could even find photos on Flickr of that event. So I hope that will be useful for you to use, and also for sometimes maybe if countries can't join one of the sessions, they can actually look at back at the sessions, and obviously some of the topics will be relevant for the next or for this year's cycle of the VNR process as well.
Thank you very much, Marike. Yeah, indeed, we sometimes are showered with so many emails that we thought that would be also good tools, so you don't have to scroll down through your inbox to find the monthly emails that we send you. And also feel free to share these. I mean, this material is obviously available to anybody who's interested. So feel free to share the link to this page. We are building it as we go. So in a few days, you will have the materials and the conversation that happen in this session. So we're updating it monthly, but it's really a place where you can also start looking at, because the topics, as Marike was pointing out, they start repeating. So you can also see the evolution of the discussion with regards to financing, stakeholder engagement, because I mean, these topics we are foreseeing that they're going to come back as new countries sign up to present their VNR. So that's available to you. And if we don't have any other comments or questions, I don't see any other hands raised. No. Well, I mean, it's a little bit early to wish you happy holidays, but we will not see each other until 2021. So enjoy December, enjoy the holidays, the end of the year. I hope that you get to celebrate this very strange year that we have all lived through. Hopefully, you know, it's going to be over, and 2021 will bring great things to all of you. So thank you for joining, and we'll connect again in January.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Enjoy.
you.
Keep safe.
Good to see you.
Bye.